My name is Sylvia Hartley. They say weddings bring families closer, but sometimes they quietly show you just how far apart you've become. I wore the pink dress I'd been saving for years, baked the banana bread he used to love, and I even ironed the cardigan with the tiny pearl buttons he once told me made me look like Mom from the old TV shows. But when I stepped into the wedding hall and realized no one had saved me a seat near him, I knew something in me shifted, and that shift would end up changing everything. Upper Michigan is quiet in the spring, not quiet like peace, but quiet like being forgotten. My house sits tucked beside a still lake, surrounded by pine and memory. I live alone now. My husband, Mark, passed 4 winters ago. Our son, Owen, visits less and less, but I understand. Young people have their lives. That's what we raise them for, right? Lately, my days move slow. I bake banana bread in the morning, read the local paper over a lukewarm cup of coffee, then water the row of stubborn tulips out front that refuse to bloom in time. Sometimes I watch the mail truck go by without stopping, and sometimes I wonder if it's stopping for someone else down the road who also checks every afternoon and pretends they're not hoping for anything. Owen called 3 weeks ago to say he was getting married. He sounded excited, distracted. Said her name was Lauren. I asked him what kind of wedding they were planning. He said they were thinking something simple but elegant, then he trailed off. He didn't ask for my thoughts, didn't ask what weekends might work for me. I asked if they'd need help with anything. He said not to worry, that they had it all handled. I told him I'd love to make the rehearsal dinner pie. He chuckled politely, said that was sweet. I hung up and stared at the phone for a while. I felt something then, something I didn't say out loud, like I had just been given the role of guest in a story I thought I helped write. But I chose to stay hopeful. I picked out the dress, cleaned the porch, even hemmed the sleeves of my coat, because part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, this wedding might bring us a little closer again. Sometimes the biggest losses don't come in shouts or slamming doors. They come in silence, in small, polite brush-offs that feel like 1,000 cuts, the kind of quiet that follows you into bed at night and makes you wonder when you stopped being needed. The wedding took place at a lakeside resort 2 hours south, a fancy place called the Hemlock Grand, all polished wood beams and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the water. Owen had said it was Lauren's idea. She wanted something modern but timeless. I arrived early out of habit, a habit Mark had always teased me about. I wore the pink dress I'd kept pressed for years, a soft rose crepe with pleats at the waist, nothing too loud. My hair was pinned back, a touch of light lipstick, the kind of outfit a mother would wear to her son's biggest day. I walked through the lobby alone. The air smelled of lilies and something expensive, like new leather. The girl at the front desk, impossibly young with a sleek ponytail, handed me a name tag and smiled a bright, empty smile, the kind that said she had no idea who I was. The tag just said Sylvia Hartley, no mention of mother of the groom, no little blue ribbon like the bride's family members all had pinned to their lapels. I held it in my hand for a moment, the smooth plastic cool against my skin, then clipped it to my dress. Inside the main ballroom, people were gathering in clusters under chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. Laughter floated above the soft music of a string quartet in the corner. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and little spoons of something chilled and expensive. I spotted Owen near the front with Lauren, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. He was laughing, his head thrown back, one hand resting on the small of Lauren's back. She looked radiant in a dress that shimmered like moonlight on water. He didn't see me right away. I hovered near the entrance, feeling like a boat that had come unmoored. One of the wedding planners, a young man in tight gray slacks and a headset, intercepted me with a clipboard and a practiced smile. He scanned my name tag. "Ah, Sylvia," he said, his voice smooth and efficient. He waved me toward a table in a far back corner, near the doors to the kitchen. "Right over here for you." I looked around. The closer tables had elegant, calligraph signs, groom's colleagues from Finch and Gable, bride's extended family, maid of honor's parents. My table card just said Sylvia. No last name, no title. I sat down between a man who sold commercial real estate and a woman who raised alpacas in Vermont, a distant cousin of Lauren's great-aunt. Both were polite, but neither had ever met Owen. They struck up a conversation about fiber yields and property taxes, talking across me for most of the night. I just smiled and nodded, a silent observer at my own son's celebration. During the toasts, the microphone passed from Lauren's father, a tall man with a booming laugh, to her older brother, then to her college roommate. There was a funny joke about tequila shots in Cancun and a sweet memory from summer camp. At one point, someone from a nearby table leaned over and asked when the groom's mom would speak. Lauren, who overheard, laughed a tinkling little laugh and said, "Oh, we're keeping it brief." Maybe later, then turned her attention back to the best man. Later never came. When dinner arrived, it was plated and quiet. I had the chicken. It was dry. A hard butter roll sat, untouched on the side of my plate. I noticed no one at my table finished their meal either. The desserts were fancier than they were good. One bite of the lemon tart, with its swirl of torched meringue, and I felt a bitterness that had nothing to do with the citrus. Owen never made it to my table. Not once. He danced with Lauren, then with her mother, then with a woman I assumed was her grandmother. I waited, fixed the hem of my dress 3 times, smiled at a photographer who passed me twice without raising his camera. By the end of the night, I was sitting quietly in that rented chair, surrounded by empty plates and people already halfway to their cars, their laughter fading down the long, carpeted hall. I folded my napkin slowly, creasing the linen with my thumbnail, and slipped it under the rim of my water glass. No one said goodbye. No one noticed when I slipped out the side door into the cool, damp air. A week passed after the wedding before Owen called. He said he wanted to have me over for dinner, just the 2 of us, said Lauren would be out with friends. His voice was cheerful but measured, the way it got when he was trying to sound casual about something important. I told him I'd be there, no questions asked. A flicker of hope, stubborn and foolish, lit up inside me. That evening, I wore the same soft cashmere cardigan I had on when I first brought Owen home from the hospital. It was a pale blue, and it still fit, soft and worn around the wrists. I baked a tray of his favorite oatmeal raisin cookies and wrapped them in foil. The drive down to their new suburb was quiet. The roads were dry, the sky an overcast, flat gray that makes you feel like winter isn't finished with you yet, even when the calendar says otherwise. Owen's new house sat in a tidy, modern development on the edge of town, brick exterior, professionally trimmed hedges, the kind of place with matching porch lights and a doorbell camera. He opened the door with a quick, polite smile, gave me a short hug that barely touched my shoulders, and said the kitchen was through the hall. "Good to see you, Mom. Come on in." But dinner wasn't ready. Instead, the dining room table was set for 2, a bottle of red wine, already uncorked, and a small, neat stack of papers placed carefully beside my salad plate. The papers were clipped together with color-coded tabs, and a sleek blue pen lay diagonally across the top page. Owen poured me a glass of wine, asked about the drive, and complimented the cookies. His tone felt rehearsed, as if he were speaking through a script he had memorized but not written. Then he gestured to the papers. "So, I was thinking," he began, his voice dropping into a more serious register. "It's just something for peace of mind, you know? In case anything ever happened to you. It would just make things easier for everyone." He picked up the stack. Just a standard durable power of attorney. A common form. Everyone's doing it these days. He said these things like they were weather reports, distant, practical, devoid of emotion. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight, and reached for the packet. The words on the first page were thick with legal terms I didn't understand, but the language underneath, the intent, was crystal clear. Financial authority, real estate management, full and immediate access, no expiration. It didn't say son. It didn't say family. It said agent. It said authorization. It said control. He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. No rush, he said, but the pen was already uncapped, waiting. I noticed then that the plates on the table were empty. There were no smells coming from the kitchen. No food, no warmth. Just wine, just paper, just a silent, pressing request beneath a friendly tone. I placed the packet back down on the polished wood. "I'll take this home with me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd like to look it over carefully." He nodded once, his smile tightening just a fraction, and reached for his wine glass. His eyes darted to the pen, then back to my face. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. We talked about nothing after that. The weather, the neighbor's new fence, some show on a streaming service I didn't know. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door and hugged me again, even lighter than before, a ghost of a gesture. Back in the car, I didn't turn the engine on right away. I sat there, my hands in my lap, the foil-wrapped cookies still untouched on the passenger seat, their warmth long gone. After a minute, the porch light behind me turned off. Motion sensor. Efficient. Automatic. Just like the dinner. I got home that night and didn't bother to change out of my shoes. I sat on the edge of the living room couch, my coat still zipped halfway, my hands resting on my lap like they didn't belong to me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to have stopped ticking. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was breathing. After a while, I stood up, my body stiff, and walked down the creaking wooden stairs to the basement. My knees ached on the way down, and the air was cold, the kind of damp chill that settles deep in old wooden beams. At the far end of the basement, behind the humming laundry machine, there was a low metal cabinet tucked beneath a shelf of old paint cans. I had to kneel on the cold concrete floor to reach it. Inside was a small, gray metal box. I hadn't opened it since the year Mark died. He had always said, "Sylvia, if anything ever happens to me, you'll find what you need in there." I'd never had a reason to look before, not really. But that night, some deep, instinctual part of me knew it was time. The lid creaked open with a protest of rusty hinges. Everything inside was organized, just like Mark always kept his workshop, neatly stacked manila folders, clipped and labeled in his meticulous print. At the very bottom, beneath the insurance policies and the deed to the house, was a sealed letter with my name on it. My chest tightened just seeing his familiar, strong handwriting. The letter was short, just a paragraph, but every word carried the weight of his love. He wrote that he knew I wouldn't ask for help, even if I needed it, that my strength was also my most vulnerable point. So he had set things up to make sure I'd never be trapped or dependent on anyone. He said not to tell Owen, not because he didn't love our son, but because he knew how the world worked. Money, he'd written, changes people, and sometimes it just reveals who they already were. The files behind the letter detailed it all. There were 2 brokerage accounts in my name, a portfolio of investments I never knew existed, stock options from his old engineering firm, a collection of mutual funds, and an annuity tied to a small commercial property in Austin, Texas. Altogether, after I did the math on a dusty notepad, it was worth over $7 million. I stared at the number, my hand trembling slightly, then closed the folder, then opened it again, thinking maybe I had read it wrong in the dim light. I hadn't. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't feel relief either. It was something heavier, like holding a secret too big for the room. I sat there on the cold basement floor for a long time, the chill seeping into my legs, the metal box still open beside me. What I felt most was the profound weight of what Mark had left behind. Not just the money, the trust, the foresight, the quiet, unwavering protection I never knew I needed until that very night. He'd seen something coming, some shadow on the horizon that I, in my love, had been blind to. And somehow, in his own quiet, methodical way, he had left me the one thing I needed most. Not safety, not wealth. Choice. I closed the box, turned the small key in the lock, and stood up slowly, my legs stiff, my hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with age. Upstairs, I turned off every light in the house except the one in the kitchen. I sat down at the table with a blank notepad and the stack of papers Owen had given me. And I began to write. Not what he wanted, but what I finally had to say. The next call came 2 days later, mid-morning. I had just sat down with a bowl of oatmeal, still wearing my house slippers. The phone buzzed once, then again. I let it go to voicemail the first time, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. The second time, I picked up. Owen's voice was smoother than usual, almost careful. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check in, see how you were feeling." He paused. "Did you have a chance to look over those papers?" "I did," I said, keeping my tone level and steady. He paused again, just a second too long, then continued, his voice regaining its practiced cheerfulness. "Great. No rush, of course, but it would be good to get things in order, just in case." "What do you mean by that, Owen?" "In case of what?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He started to say something about planning, about being practical, about protecting me, but the words came in circles, hollow and unconvincing. He mentioned a story he'd heard on the news about an elderly woman who lost access to her accounts after a stroke. Then he brought up his friend's mother, who had apparently forgotten all her online passwords for months. I could hear it underneath his performance of concern, a list of reasons not rooted in love, but in strategy. When I stayed silent, he cleared his throat, and his voice shifted slightly, a hard edge returning. "Look, Mom, if you wait too long, it might be harder to set things up. You should really think ahead. The smart thing to do would be to sign now, while everything is still simple." I looked out the kitchen window while he spoke. The trees were still bare, their branches like dark veins against the gray sky. A squirrel ran across the yard, stopped abruptly, then darted into a patch of overgrown brush. I watched it disappear and felt a new sharpness settle behind my ribs. "I'll think about it," I said. "Okay, that's fine," he replied, but then he added, "Lauren found a great financial advisor who could help make everything smoother for you. We'd be happy to set up a meeting." We ended the call. I sat there for a long time, the oatmeal growing cold and gummy in front of me. I couldn't move. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with Owen when he had a fever, rubbing his back until he fell asleep. I thought about the time I drove 5 hours in a blinding snowstorm to bring him a spare tire when his car broke down in college. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because that's what love looked like to me, an action, a presence, a choice freely given. And now here he was, speaking to me like I was a transaction, a logistical step in his 5-year plan. The house felt smaller than usual, the silence tighter, more suffocating. I got up, poured the uneaten oatmeal down the sink, and ran the water until the last bit of milk was gone. Then I opened the drawer by the fridge, pulled out the thick manila envelope where I had tucked away everything Mark left me, and held it for a while. It didn't feel like protection. Not yet. It felt like the last piece of a fortress he had built for me. And now it was time I learned how to build something for myself. Not out of anger, but because even a mother's love has limits, and I had finally, quietly, reached mine. It took me 3 days to decide what to do next. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed the silence to mean something. I didn't want my next step to come from a place of fear or pride. I wanted it to come from knowing, from a deep and settled understanding of what was being asked of me and what I could no longer allow. I found Carol's number written on the back of an old birthday card tucked inside a photo album. She used to be a trust and estate lawyer at a firm downtown before she retired. We hadn't spoken in years, not since her husband passed, but I remembered how she once said to me at his service, "The quietest women often leave the most permanent marks." When I called, she picked up right away. Her voice sounded older, a little gravelly, but as sharp as I remembered. I told her what was happening, my own voice wavering slightly as I laid out the story of the wedding, the dinner, the papers. She didn't react, didn't offer sympathy or judgment. She just listened. When I was done, She said simply, "We should meet. My place, tomorrow afternoon. Bring everything. Just coffee and clarity." We sat at her kitchen table the next day. Her home was small, neat, and filled with handmade quilts and stacks of books. It smelled of cinnamon and old paper. I handed her the large envelope. She read through every line of Mark's documents first, her eyes moving with the methodical pace of a woman who had read too many things too late for too many people. When she finished, she looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Sylvia," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you have more power than you realize. This money is protected, the investments are strong, and your legal standing is solid, but only if you keep it that way." She asked if I wanted to establish a trust. I said yes. She asked who I wanted to name as a trustee or beneficiary. I took a breath. "No one," I said. "Not yet. Maybe never." She nodded, a slow, understanding gesture. Then she said, "Now let's see what your son brought you." I pulled out the stack of papers from my bag. She flipped through the durable power of attorney without flinching. "The language is aggressive," she stated flatly. "Immediate authority, sweeping access, no oversight, no accountability. Sylvia, these aren't documents written to care for someone. These are written to absorb someone." We spent the next 2 hours rewriting everything. We transferred all the accounts Mark had left me into a private, irrevocable living trust under my sole and absolute control. We locked access behind conditions so strict no one could bypass them. Carol added a medical clause that required 2 independent, board-certified physicians to confirm in writing any loss of cognitive capacity before any authority could ever be shifted. Then she slid the final signature page in front of me and handed me a pen. I signed my name slowly, carefully. Not because I was nervous, but because it felt like a sacred act, like drawing a boundary I should have drawn years ago. It was a simple line of ink on paper, but it said, "I am not invisible. I am not a convenience. I am not yours to manage." When we finished, Carol slid all the notarized documents into a thick, waterproof folder. "Keep this somewhere you can reach it easily, but not obviously," she advised. That night, I placed it in the back of the cabinet beneath my kitchen sink, tucked behind a dusty, forgotten box of dishwasher pods no one ever touches. Driving home from her house, the air felt different, brighter somehow. Not lighter, but sharper, like I could finally see the shape of my own life without squinting. The trees along the road seemed to stand taller. The lake, when I passed it, looked bluer. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like someone's forgotten parent. I felt like a woman with a spine and a choice. The invitation came in a text message a few days later. It was from Owen. "Hey, Mom. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot. I'd love to try again. How about a proper dinner this time? Just the 2 of us. No papers, no pressure. I'll cook." I waited a few hours before responding, letting the words settle. Then I typed back one word, "Sure." I didn't tell him I wouldn't be coming alone. Carol met me at a coffee shop a block from his neighborhood and parked her car on the opposite side of the street. We agreed she wouldn't walk in with me. She'd sit in her car, wait, and step in only if needed. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I had learned in the past week what it meant to be still without being soft. Owen opened the door, smiling, his expression warm and casual. He wore a soft button-down shirt and socks without shoes, a deliberate performance of domesticity, as if he wanted to remind me he was still the boy who used to run barefoot through the hallway. The kitchen smelled wonderful, like garlic and roasted vegetables. There was a loaf of artisan bread on the table, real food this time, or at least the look of it. We sat. We made small talk first. He asked if I'd been reading anything good. I mentioned a mystery novel I'd picked up from the library. He nodded but didn't ask what it was about. I could see his eyes kept drifting toward the polished side table, where another stack of papers waited, clipped and neatly arranged. They were different from before, in a different folder, but not unfamiliar. When he finally reached for them, his tone shifted, slower, more deliberate, the voice of someone making a final, reasonable appeal. So, he began, I spoke to a friend who works in elder law, and they recommended a much simpler arrangement. Nothing binding, really. Just provisional. Just something to keep things smooth for you. He slid the new, friendlier-looking papers toward me. I didn't touch them. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a folded document of my own, and placed it gently on top of his stack. There were no words, just the soft, definitive sound of paper meeting paper. Then I reached for my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. He looked down, confused at first, then unfolded my document. It was a single page, a formal notice of trust execution. My signature was at the bottom, bold and clear. It detailed the full transfer of all assets into private legal protection, revocable only by me, under the terms I alone had set. His face didn't change right away, but his eyes did. They blinked more rapidly, and his jaw shifted almost imperceptibly, the way a person's does when they've bitten into something sour but are trying to smile through it. I spoke carefully, my voice calm and even. I appreciate your concern, Owen. I understand that life is stressful and that planning for the future is part of being a responsible adult. But I've already taken care of mine. Everything is in place. Everything is final. He finally looked up at me, his mask of pleasant concern gone. Did you talk to someone? He asked, his voice flat. Yes, I replied. I talked to a friend. Someone who understands what it means to be prepared without being pressured. The room quieted. The smell of roasting vegetables suddenly seemed cloying. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping once against the tablecloth before stopping. For a long moment, he didn't look like a son or a husband or a successful professional. He looked like a man who had just played his last card and realized, too late, that he had lost the game. Carol entered just then, as we had planned. She didn't knock, just opened the front door and stepped inside, a smooth, polite smile on her face. She greeted Owen softly by name and introduced herself as my legal counsel. Then she turned to me. Sylvia, she said, her voice warm but firm, I believe we're ready to leave now. I stood, gathered my coat, and followed her to the door without turning back to look at the uneaten meal, the expensive wine, or the son I was leaving behind. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold with a coming wind. I exhaled slowly a long, deep breath that felt like it came from the very bottom of my lungs, the way you do when something heavy finally breaks loose inside you. Not out of anger, but release. For the first time, I wasn't walking away hurt. I was walking away certain. The next morning came colder than the forecast had promised, the kind of deep cold that settled in the floorboards, quiet and lingering. I made toast, poured a glass of orange juice, and sat at my kitchen table without touching either. My hands were still warm from the relief of the night before, but my chest felt like a space where something had closed itself off. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was one message from one person. I picked it up and read the single line from Owen, "You made this harder than it had to be." No hello, no name. Just those 7 words. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone face down on the table. The toast had gone cold. The juice no longer looked refreshing. There was no follow-up message, no apology, no explanation. And I knew, in that gut-deep way a mother knows her child, that the words weren't about disappointment. They were about control. They were the words of someone who had found a door he thought he could keep propped open forever and was now rattling the locked handle in frustration. Later that day, I walked out to the garage to sort through a few boxes I hadn't touched in years, needing something to do with my hands. I found the old photo albums. I opened one to a page from a Christmas long ago. Owen was 5, his cheeks red from the snow, holding up a bright yellow toy truck, smiling so wide I could count the spaces where his baby teeth had fallen out. I used to frame that smile in my mind every time I was tired or scared. It had been my reason for a lot of things. But looking at it now, I saw something different. Not just a happy boy, but a boy who had always gotten what he wanted without having to ask twice. Mark and I had made sure of it. Not because he demanded it, but because we thought love meant removing every obstacle, paving every road, carrying every weight for him. We had given him too much, and somewhere along the way, he had started to believe he was entitled to what was never his to take. In the afternoon, I received another text, this time from Lauren. Her words were polished and polite. Sylvia, I'm so sorry things have become tense. We were just trying to plan responsibly. If you ever want to talk, I'm available. Then she wrote something that stayed with me longer than I expected, a sentence that coiled in my stomach. You raised a strong, ambitious son. We just wanted to support his future. I read it twice. The words were perfectly crafted, a masterpiece of plausible deniability. But underneath the smooth veneer, I heard the message clearly. You had your time. Now let go. I didn't respond. I turned my phone off and left it on the counter. That night, I poured the untouched glass of orange juice down the sink. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer wanted to consume something that had lost its temperature, that had sat out too long. I stood by the window and looked out into the deep, starless dark, the sky already pulling the cloak of winter over the rooftops. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just stood still, because sometimes the loudest, most powerful answer you can give is no answer at all. And sometimes when a door closes, it's not meant to be reopened, not by force, not by guilt, and certainly not by blood. The house had never been loud, even when Mark was alive and tinkering in the garage, but after the last exchange with Owen and the profound silence that followed, something shifted. The quiet no longer felt neutral, it felt like a verdict. I started moving more slowly through the rooms, not because I was tired, but because there no longer seemed to be a reason to hurry. The days took on a soft, deliberate shape. I folded towels with geometric precision, wiped down the kitchen counters even when they were already clean, and watered the dormant plants at the exact same time each morning. I wasn't waiting for a call, but I still noticed, with a dull ache, when it didn't come. 3 days passed before the little red light on the answering machine blinked. I hadn't answered the phone when it rang, but I did press the button to listen afterward. Owen's voice played through the small speaker, tinny and distant, like it was coming from behind a door I no longer planned to open. He said he had overreacted. He said he just wanted to make sure things were handled properly. Then his voice softened, cracked slightly. He missed the way things used to be. He said he hoped we could talk again. Just talk. I didn't delete the message. I didn't save it either. I let it sit there in the digital ether, a relic of a relationship that now existed somewhere between memory and obligation. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through old text threads on my phone, conversations I hadn't opened in months. There were photos from years back, Owen grilling in the backyard at a 4th of July barbecue, Lauren holding a blueberry pie I had helped her make for Thanksgiving, a blurry picture of the golden retriever we once shared, before she got too old to climb the stairs. And then, farther back, texts from when Owen was in college and still used too many exclamation points, when he still signed off with a simple, unthinking love you. I clicked on one of those old messages and just stared at it, not trying to feel anything, just noticing what had once been. Then, with a strange sense of calm, I started deleting them one by one. Not in anger, but in acknowledgement. I was clearing out a room that was no longer in use. The last one I kept was a short video, Owen at 10 years old, holding a flashlight under his chin in a blanket fort, telling a ghost story in a wavering voice while my own laughter, younger and lighter, echoed in the background. I watched it twice, then closed my phone. I went to bed early that night, not to sleep, but to lie still in the dark. The bed felt larger. Not emptier, just more honest. I had given that boy everything I had, and the man he became had used it to build a case against my own autonomy. That was the hardest part of it all. Not the greed, not the manipulation, but the slow, dawning realization that what I had given from a place of pure love, he had repurposed into leverage. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a mother in his eyes and had become a resource. And that was a specific kind of grief no one ever warns you about, a grief that sounds like your own voice on an answering machine, saying nothing back. I moved at the end of February, just before the last of the deep snow melted away. The new house wasn't far, still near the quiet shores of the lake, but it was tucked deeper into a sleepier street, smaller, older, the kind of place with a crooked mailbox and green shutters that rattled in a friendly way when the wind came off the water. It felt right, like it had been waiting for someone who no longer needed space to entertain, only space to exhale. I didn't bring much with me, just what mattered. The framed photo of Mark on the bookshelf, his smile still so vivid, the box of recipe cards, handwritten and smudged with flour, a few boxes of my favorite books, the chipped blue kettle that whistled just right, and a ceramic owl from the old garden that used to sit near the back porch and scare no birds at all. Most mornings, I started walking to the little public library on Main Street, not because I needed more books, but because I liked the gentle, anonymous sound of pages being turned nearby. I picked up a few volunteer shifts at the front desk, nothing official, just enough to feel useful, enough to keep my hands from reaching for things that no longer reached back. That's where I met them, the women who came every week like clockwork. They weren't a loud group. They didn't wear matching coats or speak in a flurry of gossip. They arrived quietly, one by one, and stayed longer than they needed to. There was Helen, who used to run a diner downtown and now made stunning quilts from her late husband's old flannel shirts. There was June, who always brought a thermos of peppermint tea and poured a cup for anyone who looked like they needed it. And there was Margot, a retired art teacher who carried a handsome wooden cane but never seemed to use it until she got near the front door. We didn't become friends all at once. It happened slowly, the way trust does, over shared thermoses of tea, over quiet nods exchanged in the biography aisle, over the silent, unspoken agreement that none of us needed to explain what we had lost, only that we still showed up every day. One afternoon, Margot asked if I wanted to help with the neglected garden bed behind the library. I said yes before I even looked at it. The soil was hard, packed down by a long winter, and stubborn in that way land can be when it's been left alone for too long. But we turned it anyway, the three of us, one row at a time, our knees in the dirt, our hands stained with earth. We didn't make much small talk, just fell into the simple, honest rhythm of women planting something together that might bloom later. We planted tomatoes, basil, and a row of defiant sunflowers. We started calling it the quiet corner, and it became ours. We didn't talk about our children very often. When we did, it wasn't with bitterness or regret. It was with a kind of sober recognition, like looking at an old scar and remembering the moment right before it broke the skin. What we shared wasn't grief, it was clarity. A new kind of belonging, not to each other, but to ourselves in the company of others. In that space, with soil under my fingernails and the scent of old books nearby, I stopped feeling like a burden or a footnote. I started feeling like a woman again. Not waiting, not missing. Just here. Present. Rooted. Like something finally, quietly, ready to grow. It was a Saturday morning in late April when I saw him again. I had just finished sweeping the pollen from the front porch of my new house. The breeze was still sharp, but the sun had pushed through the clouds for the first time in days, casting long shadows across the lawn. I was about to go inside and make coffee when I noticed a car parked at the curb. Not a rental, not a delivery truck. Just one familiar gray sedan, sitting still as a stone, its engine off. He sat there for a long while before he got out, moving more slowly than I remembered. The easy confidence in his stride had dulled, replaced by the hesitant gait of someone who had spent the night thinking too long. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans that hadn't been pressed. There was no folder in his hand, no pen. Just a plain white envelope. He didn't come to the door right away. He just walked up the short path and sat down on the bottom wooden step, his back to the street, just like he used to do as a boy when he was waiting for me to finish dinner. His back was hunched, his shoulders curled in a shape of contrition I hadn't seen in years. I opened the front door, the screen groaning softly, and stood there for a moment. Then I walked down the steps, stopping a few feet from him. He looked up, and I saw his eyes, the same blue, but quieter now, the hard, ambitious glint gone. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice low and uneven. I was overwhelmed. I let money speak louder than love. I thought I was being practical, but I was just being greedy. He paused, looked down at the envelope in his hand, and held it out to me. "Things haven't gone the way I thought they would." I didn't take it, not yet. He let his hand fall. "I don't expect anything," he said, his gaze fixed on the cracked concrete of the walkway. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did. What it cost." I let the silence hold a little longer, let the spring air fill the space between us. Then I sat down beside him on the step. Not close, not far, just enough for the old wood to creak under our combined weight. "I forgive you, Owen," I said softly. And I meant it. But then I added, "But forgiveness doesn't come with a key. Some doors, once they're closed, need time before they can open again. If they open at all." He nodded, a slow, accepting movement. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He just nodded. We sat there together for a little longer. The wind brushed against the porch rail. A robin hopped across the sidewalk, entirely unconcerned with us. Finally, he stood. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. He placed the white envelope beside me on the step, then turned and walked back to his car. I didn't call after him. I didn't wave. I just watched him go, and when his car turned the corner and disappeared from view, I stayed seated on the step. Not waiting, not grieving, just breathing. Because sometimes the first step back is not walking towards someone, it's knowing how to sit still in your own space, without being pulled under by the tide. The first snow came early that year, thin and soft, like it wasn't sure it wanted to stay. I watched it fall from the kitchen window, the flakes drifting down to dust the pines, the same way I used to watch Owen wait for the school bus when he was small. The world felt paused but not empty, just still. I spent the morning in silence, no radio, no noise from the kettle, just the sound of the old house breathing with me. I lit a fire in the small wood stove in the living room and sat, with a wool blanket across my lap, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. There was no sadness, no particular joy either. Just a kind of deep, settled peace I hadn't known in years. A peace that didn't come from fixing things, but from the quiet understanding that I didn't have to anymore. Later, I found myself writing a letter. Not to Owen, not to Mark, but to the woman I used to be. The one who thought love meant always saying yes. The one who believed that being quiet was the same as keeping things safe. I wrote to her gently, with the compassion I now reserved for myself. I told her she was allowed to stop holding everything and everyone together all alone. I told her she could sit down now. The weight had been carried far enough. I sealed the letter in an envelope and tucked it between the pages of a book on my shelf that I no longer planned to finish. Some stories don't need endings, they just need a gentle release. That evening I baked a small cake, just one layer, frosted with simple buttercream. I lit a single candle and placed it in the center. In the soft glow, no one sang, no one clapped. I closed my eyes and I made a wish that wasn't for anyone else. It was for my own stillness, for my own quiet beginnings, for a life that no longer needed to prove its worth to anyone. I opened my eyes and blew out the flame. The room didn't feel silent. It felt earned. If this story touched something quiet in you, maybe something you haven't said out loud in years, know that you're not alone. Every woman who's ever felt invisible still carries a fire inside her that cannot be taken. If you've ever had to walk away from something that wanted to consume you, only to find your own voice waiting on the other side, I hope you carry that voice gently. And if you feel like sharing your own story, even just a piece of it, please know that somewhere, someone is listening. Because sometimes, being heard is the first step back to being whole.